What makes role-playing games great? For me, it's the group dynamic. It's the story told by several people. Yeah, one person is in charge, but the others feed into it with such honest energy that it creates something unique and amazing. Change one person in your gaming group and the entire story shifts. God, I love that. But sometimes people can't make it. Life gets in the way, or personalities don't click and the game fizzles out. Hell, maybe you want to keep playing, but no one else can even stay serious. How many times have you wished that you could just play by yourself? Turns out you can. Some inventive people have come up with Game Master Emulators, or GMEs. These emulators act as oracles, mostly driven through yes or no questions and some sort of variation mechanic. Yeah, you sacrifice the group dynamic by playing this way, but no one can cancel a session, and hey, if you're looking for something different, GMEs could totally be used by a group of people to play without a GM. Oh, and the best part? They work with your game system of choice. So today we'll be looking at one of these systems, the Madey Upy Namey Emulator, or, as I probably mispronounce it, Mune. Mune uses an oracle system that runs off a standard D6. To play, you ask the oracle a yes or no question, then roll your dice. Based on that number, you can receive one of 6 answers to your questions. Yes, yes and, yes but, no, no and finally, no but. Seems simple, but it's in execution that this oracle really shines. Take the question, do I find a gun? Rolling a standard yes or no ends the question. However, what happens when you receive and, or but? Well, just about anything. What does and mean to you? Do I find a gun? Yes, and it's loaded. Do I find a gun? Yes, and it isn't loaded. Yes, and a knife. Yes, and the bad guy sees it too. Notice, not all of those are positive. Even when it comes to yes, you can give yourself a negative outcome. On the other side, what could but mean? Do I find a gun? Yes, but there's no ammo. Do I find a gun? Yes, but it's damaged. Yes, but the bad guy sees it too. Yes, but it's not the gun you expected to find. But is a little harder to make positive, though nothing stops you from doing that. It really is up to the player to decide. More than just an oracle, Mune has other ways to alter the game. Dictated by the changing story or setting, things become less likely or more likely. Take that earlier question about finding a gun. That sounds a lot harder to do while scavenging an abandoned house in a post-apocalypse setting. How about finding a gun inside of a burned-down raider camp? Sounds a little easier, right? That's where the mechanic of likelihood comes in. For likelihood, you roll 2 6-sided die and take the number that's closer to reality. So, when looking for a gun in an abandoned, already picked clean location, you roll 2 dice and take the lower number. Lower numbers lean closer towards some variation of no. To further spice things up, Mune has the intervention system. You see, a point is gained for every 6 you roll on a d6. After 3 points are reached, the total is reduced to 0, and we turn to the intervention table. Much like the oracle, the intervention table is a d6 table that produces one of 6 game-changing outcomes. Outcome number 1 introduces a new entity. Mune describes an entity as a person or group of people. Outcomes 2 and 3 reflect positive or negative changes to an already existing entity. Outcomes 4 and 5 advance or regress the current plot. The meaning and effect of any of these is decided by the player the moment they receive their intervention. When a 6 is rolled on the intervention table, something called a wild happens. While a wild is interpreted by the player, it is not fully decided by the player. A wild represents twists of fate, coincidences, or just plain random events. However, they are influenced by what Mune calls a portent. A portent is a 2-word sentence meant to give the player an idea of what to do. Don't get me wrong, they can be longer than 2 words, but they're meant to be taken from some form of random generation, and it is up to the player to decipher their meaning. For example, say I get something like cactus and ball. What could it mean? Surely not a literal cactus ball, but meaning can be taken out of it. Cacti are known for their needles, and balls can be metal. Maybe I decide that cactus ball means mace, or maybe it's that stupid little cactus Pokemon. See what I mean by random and wild? Moving on, Mune also has a way to determine initial NPC attitude. The starting attitude table is another D6 table, reading hostile, neutral, or friendly. The reasons for this attitude would be open to interpretation, and maybe even pulled from portents. The final thing Mune has to offer is the table when everything is not as expected, or TWEN. Not to be used often, the author encourages TWEN's use when setting up a scene. Say you just entered an abandoned home in the post-apocalypse. There are several things you assume when I say abandoned home. Ruined furniture, dust, maybe a corpse, or an empty tin can. The TWEN was designed to play with these expectations. It is triggered by asking some form of the question, is everything as it seems? The answer is found on a D10 table, which alters the elements of a scene. Elements come in two forms, major and simple. Simple elements don't really affect the scene, but are mostly background or environmental details. Changing a simple element shouldn't change the scene in any dramatic way. It could be something like lit or unlit candles, whether it's raining or not raining while a scene takes place indoors. Major elements are things that affect the scene, characters, fire, or some sort of time-based threat. Altering these should change the course of your scene. If a character wasn't where you expected them to be, what sort of changes does that make? Depending on the number rolled against the TWEN, you would increase, decrease, add, or remove an element. So, you would add characters, or remove them, or increase, or decrease the rain. But remember, changes don't have to be too dramatic or drastic. The last two numbers on the TWEN equal to wild positive and wild negative. Both function off portents. You simply use the generated words to alter the scene in a positive or negative way. In the earlier example of cactus ball, we could say that the positive is that our starving survivor finds a living cactus with one of those prickly little pears on top. A negative reading could mean that a kid simply kicked his ball onto a cactus and it popped. Well, that's my brief explanation of the Madey Upy Namey Emulator. You can find a link to the PDF of this GME in the description. I've played a few games using it, and I've got to say, one of the biggest issues people have had is not using the actual game system with Mune. The only advice I have for this is don't use Mune when the game system you're using can solve the issue. Mune should not be deciding if your attack lands or if you can climb a wall. Either way, I plan on uploading a few solo roleplays in the near future, so if you're interested, feel free to stick around. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, I'll be in other worlds.